What would you do if, trapped in the frozen mountains, the only thing keeping you alive was a secret so dark that many would rather die? Today, I won't tell you a fairy tale, but a true story, one that changes you forever. I'll take you to the heart of the Andes, where a plane broke in two and the thin line between life and death became an unimaginable choice. Prepare to relive the white hell of Flight 571, a journey that will make you understand how far the human spirit will go to resist giving up. This is the story of 72 days of courage, desperation, and the most extreme decision ever made to stay alive. Imagine a Friday, October 13th, 1972. A plane, a Fairchild FH-227, leaves Montevideo, Uruguay bound for Santiago, Chile. On board there are not just ordinary passengers but a rugby team. The Old Christians, lively young people, their friends, family, and companions. A group that was on their way to play a match in Chile. It was a short trip, a sporting adventure among friends, a memory to be created. But what awaited them wasn't a rugby pitch, but hell. As they flew over the imposing peaks of the Andes, something went wrong. A navigational error, an underestimation of the altitude in those prohibitive weather conditions, with thick clouds enveloping everything, led the plane to collide with the mountain. It wasn't a single impact, but a series of violent impacts. The right wing broke off, then the tail and the fuselage, like a runaway bullet, slid down the valley on the snow and ice before coming to an abrupt stop in a remote and inaccessible spot. The date of October 13th, 1972 would go down in history as the day of one of the most dramatic and incredible air disasters ever. It wasn't just an accident, it was the beginning of a test that would lay bare the true essence of man. When the crash stopped, the silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the moans and groans of the injured. Of the 45 passengers on board, 12 died instantly or shortly after the crash. Others succumbed in the hours and days that followed from their injuries or the freezing temperatures. 33 of them remained trapped at 4,000 meters in the midst of a vast expanse of snow and ice with no immediate hope of rescue. The wreckage of the plane, or at least what remained of it, became their refuge. A deformed metal shell without walls and with a huge hole where the tail had been, they had to repair it as best they could to find some shelter from the incessantly howling icy wind. Inside, the broken seats and personal belongings strewn across the floor were a reminder of the normality of a journey that would never end as planned. The first few days were a mixture of hope and despair. The onboard radio, for a brief moment, continued to broadcast news. They could hear that the search was underway. This small spark of hope was all they could hold on to. But the search, hampered by extreme weather conditions and the vastness of the mountain range, yielded no results. After 8 days, the hardest blow, they heard on the radio that the search had been called off. They had been declared dead. There, in that moment, they understood that no one would come to save them. They were alone at the mercy of the Andes. 72 days of hell had just begun. The conditions were unimaginable. During the day, the sun was blinding, reflecting off the snow, but it provided no warmth. At night, temperatures plummeted to dozens of degrees below zero. They had no proper clothing, only what they wore on the plane, insufficient for such a hostile environment. The survivors' injuries, such as broken legs, bruises, and frostbite, worsened without medical attention. Every movement was torture. Food was almost non existent. A few chocolates, a few bottles of wine, snacks. Everything ran out quickly. Water was not a problem. There was snow everywhere, but melting it required ingenuity and warmth, both of which were in short supply. Thirst was still a nagging worry. The bodies of their deceased comrades lay in the snow, a constant reminder of their fragility. But the real challenge wasn't just physical, it was mental. The loneliness, the isolation, the loss of all hope of rescue. A few, the strongest, the natural leaders, like Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa, began to organize the group to search for solutions to keep alive that glimmer of clarity necessary to avoid succumbing to madness. They tried to create roofs with seats, to patch the holes, to use the plane's windows to melt the snow. Every small victory was a sign that they could still do it. As the days turned into weeks, cold and hunger became increasingly ferocious enemies. The few scraps of food had long since disappeared. The survivors, already weakened, began to lose weight visibly. Exhaustion was such that even talking was difficult. Their bodies were literally wasting away. In this landscape of horror and despair, a conversation emerged that would change everything. The topic was taboo, unthinkable, something the human mind would normally reject with horror: cannibalism. It was not a choice made lightly, it was the subject of exhausting discussions, prayers, and tears. The youngest were the most reluctant, but the logic of survival was ruthless. The bodies of their deceased friends and family lay there, preserved by the freezing cold. Roberto Canessa, a medical student, understood the biological reality better than anyone. Without protein, they would have no chance. Without flesh, without strength, their muscles would atrophy, their hearts would fail. It was the only option. For many, it was the hardest ordeal, a betrayal of morality, an act against every ethical principle. But faced with certain death, the prospect of seeing their loved ones starve, their perspective changed. They made a pact. Each member agreed that, if they died, their body would serve to give life to the others. It was not an act of cruelty, but of extreme love, of sacrifice, of a desperation so profound that it reinvented morality to save life. The first times were the hardest. They remembered the unpleasant taste, the revulsion. But hunger was the stronger call. Over time, it became a mechanical, necessary act, stripped of emotion. It was their secret, their burden, their only hope. A choice that symbolized courage, desperation, but above all, the acceptance of a cruel reality in order to stay alive. Without this decision, none of them would have survived. The weeks piled up. Time seemed to stand still. The 72 days of confinement were testing the sanity of the few remaining. After the search was called off, they knew their only hope of survival was to act alone. The anguish was palpable, but their will to live, fueled by that final pact, remained intact. They decided to undertake an undertaking that many thought was foolish, almost suicidal. An expedition across the Andes to seek help. Who could do it? Two names stood out: Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa. Nando, driven by the grief of losing his mother and sister in the accident, possessed incredible strength of spirit and unstoppable tenacity. Roberto, with his medical knowledge and determination, was the ideal man to face physical challenges. They weren't the only ones to set out. Initially, others tried, but the extreme conditions forced them to turn back. The mountain was merciless, but Nando and Roberto didn't give up. They spent days preparing. They had almost nothing. They took the clothes of their dead comrades to dress in layers, transformed the seat padding into rudimentary footwear, used parts of the plane as sleds to carry what little they had. Their goal was clear: to climb the mountain blocking their path west, where they believed Chile was. They had no idea how vast the mountain range was, nor where exactly they were. They only knew the direction of the sun and their determination. Before leaving, they said goodbye to the other survivors, knowing that this could be a final farewell. The trust they placed in them was immense. The fate of all depended on these two men, on this heroic march through the frozen hell. On December 12, 1972, Nando Parrado and Roberto Canessa, accompanied for a short distance by Antonio Vizintin, began their march. Vizintin was then sent back with some of the recovered food to give the group further hope, leaving the two explorers alone. They set out with a makeshift backpack, some human flesh for sustenance, and an unshakable faith. The journey was agonizing. They climbed peaks that seemed insurmountable, with snow reaching their waists, the wind cutting their skin, the sun burning their eyes. Every step was a struggle. The altitude made them suffer. The thin air took their breath away. Fatigue was constant, hunger a relentless call. They encouraged each other, talking about the future they hoped to see again, about their families, about the little things that gave meaning to life. Nando, in particular, had a fixed goal: to find the end of the mountain. He had promised his father he would return. 10 days of marching, 10 days of freezing temperatures, fatigue, and danger. They had surpassed the peak they believed to be the highest, only to discover that even more imposing peaks loomed on the horizon. Despair could have gripped them, but it did not break them. At a certain point, after days and days when all hope seemed exhausted, they saw something. Not a mountain, not a fragment of a plain. They saw grass. Then, after a few more days, a stream. And then, the sound of a river. The sound of flowing water, no longer just ice, was like a symphony. It was the first real sign of life outside that white desert. They had descended, they were out of the wildest part of the Andes. Then, the most incredible thing. They saw a man on horseback on the other side of the river. After calling to him for hours, throwing rocks to attract attention, the man saw them. Two unrecognizable figures, ragged, emaciated, gesticulating desperately. The man realized they weren't locals. Civilization was within reach. The vaquero, a Chilean farmer named Sergio Catalan, unable to cross the raging river, wrote a message and threw it across with a rock. I'm from a plane that crashed in the mountains. There are 14 of us. We must get out of here as quickly as possible. This was Nando's note. Sergio understood the gravity of the situation and galloped for hours to raise the alarm. The news spread quickly. Suddenly, the story that had been forgotten resurfaced with unprecedented force. On December 22, 1972, 72 days after the crash, rescue teams reached the wreckage. The entire world held its breath. The rescue was a complex operation, conducted with helicopters that landed in extreme conditions. The survivors, incredibly, were still there, thin, emaciated, but alive. There were 16 of them. Their story, initially shrouded in mystery due to their extreme diet, emerged in all its harsh truth, generating debate and understanding. What they had done was horrific, but it was their only path to life. The story of Flight 571 and its survivors has become a global icon of courage, resilience, and hope. It is a heartbreaking testament to the fragility of human life in the face of the power of nature, but also to the unstoppable strength of the human spirit when pushed to the limit. It is a warning to never give up, to seek solutions even where there seem to be none, and to cherish every single day we are given. Their story reminds us that within each of us lies a primal strength, capable of overcoming the unthinkable. If this story of survival touched your heart, click here to discover other incredible stories of human resilience.